Welcome to the Maternal Wealth Podcast, a space for all things related to maternal health, pregnancy, and beyond. I'm your host, Stephanie Terrio. I am a labor and delivery nurse and a mother to 3 beautiful boys. Each week, we dive into inspiring stories and expert insights to remind us of the power that you hold in childbirth and motherhood. We're here to explore the joys, the challenges, and the complexities of maternal health. Every mother's journey is unique and every story deserves to be told. Please note that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to replace professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider for medical guidance that is tailored to your specific needs. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Today, we welcome Reesa Morala. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist located in California. She owns Embrace Renewal Therapy and Wellness Collective. Let's welcome Reesa Morala.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I would love to start off the episode learning about yourself before you became a parent.
Yes, so myself before I became a therapist, I got my bachelor's degree in musical theater, surprisingly enough. And through my own journey, kind of at the end of my time getting my bachelor's degree, I had a medical diagnosis that kind of took me out of that world, forced me to go back to the drawing board, figure out what my plan B was. Prior to that, though, I was born and raised kind of all over the world, lots of different countries that I lived in and states that I've lived in. So kind of all over the place. I'm Filipino American. So there's lots of stuff there as far as just a little bit about my background and kind of the home environment that I grew up in. Definitely was a little bit more of a chaotic home environment, which I think has really influenced my current focus as well and my specialties that I do now as a therapist.
So essentially, were you having the idea of becoming a marriage and family therapist prior to having children?
Yes. So I was actually at the end of my degree when I was pregnant. Yeah.
I love a good love story. Would you share with us how you and your partner met?
Yes. My story is probably a little bit different than the version he likes to tell, but I find that happens a lot. We met in undergrad, and he was my orientation leader my freshman year.
Okay.
And we actually didn't start dating until he had graduated, but we had lots of run-ins with each other, really random, awkward run-ins. And then the most awkward was when he came back. I actually later became an orientation leader myself, so I kind of took his position once he graduated.
Okay.
And he came back just to visit for one of the campus events that we were doing during orientation. And there was a person, I was going around checking the tables, and there was a person who was just very awkward and said something that was incredibly uncomfortable for the whole table. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go now, because it was very awkward for me. And my now husband was like, oh, my car is that way. I'm just going to walk you. And I said, okay. And he is a talker. And so this is in Illinois, and that was the coldest place I had ever lived in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd grown up in warmer island climate. This was in the middle of winter, and he just kept talking and talking and talking. And I was at my dorm already, and I said, it's way too cold out here. And he's just continuing to talk. And I felt really bad. So I was like, did you want to come up? Cause I'm really cold. And we continued to talk till 5 a.m. the next morning. And we've been together ever since.
Did you always know that you wanted to be a mom?
Yes. I was one of those folks that I'd been told a lot growing up, oh, you'd be such a great mother. I think some of that came, as I mentioned, I grew up in a chaotic kind of home environment. And I was in this really interesting dynamic because I have 2 older siblings, but they're much older than me and much older than my younger siblings, because my younger siblings are much younger than me. So I was kind of right smack in the middle by myself a little bit. So I was with my older siblings as a younger child, but then they left the house. And then I became the older sibling for my younger siblings that were born later once my older ones left. And during that period with my younger siblings, there was a lot of abuse that was going on in the home, physical abuse, emotional abuse. And so I definitely found myself kind of taking on that like protector role for my younger siblings. And so that was very much kind of innately something that's a role that I took on really young and just kind of continued. I ended up continuing to work with kids. Even in my therapy career for the first half of my career was working with kids because I had always worked with kids, and people would always tell me, oh, you'd be such a great mother. And so I'd always had it in my head that, oh, well, I'm told that this is something I'm good at. So this is what I should do. You know, this is my next path. And that's what society tells you. You get married, you have kids, you know, all these things. And so I was definitely kind of a rule follower in that way. And so I don't think that I ever knew an idea of not having children.
So now you have 2 children, ages 11 and 9. And would you share with us, did you plan for your pregnancies? Was it a surprise pregnancy? And then how was your first pregnancy?
I did plan for these pregnancies. I was very fortunate in the fact that it happened quicker than maybe I anticipated it because I was prepared. You hear a lot that it can take a while. So mine was planned because of my own personal medical. I was on medications that aren't good for having children. And so it was a conscious choice to kind of titrate myself off of those medications so that I could be able to start having, or at least start trying to have kids. And I was incredibly fortunate that after I actually stopped my medication, within the next cycle, I was pregnant. And I remember when I found out that I was pregnant, because again, we were trying, so it was one of those things where I was consistently, looking and tracking and, okay, is this it? And I remember my husband, he travels a lot for work. And so it was one of his business trips that he was out of town for. So I was by myself when I found out. And I remember because I remember reading that, the best time to take a pregnancy is for, first thing in the morning kind of deal. And so I would set a pregnancy test on the toilet seat just to remind me, when I got up. And for whatever reason, that particular day, I got up really early. I'm talking like 3 a.m. in the morning. I was like, and then I saw the pregnancy test and I was like, oh, well, technically this is first thing in the morning. Okay. And sure enough, it was positive. So I didn't go back to sleep nonetheless, at 3 a.m. in the morning. There was no way I was going back to sleep for that. And so I was up just waiting for it. My husband was coming back into town that day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to tell him. I want to tell him in person. And so that was kind of how that all happened. And then moving forward, the rest of my pregnancy, I felt like I was doing really good. Again, being a rule follower, I was reading all of the books. I was not one of those folks that liked to read kind of the fluffier books. I wanted hard, cold facts. And maybe that's because, again, what I do, there's a science to my job now. And so I wanted the hard science. So I was reading, the big Mayo Clinic, give me all the facts. And so if I'm going to go into this, I want to know exactly what to expect. And so I was doing all the things, following all of the recommendations. I don't think I've ever eaten better in my life than when I was pregnant, because again, it wasn't about me. It was about this other person. So you're telling me I have to chug down a kale smoothie and chunks and all, then I was going to do it because that's what, they would say is best for my baby. Kind of the bump started for me in my pregnancy journey when I went for my gestational diabetes test. And because I'm Filipino American and I have a high history, family history at least, of diabetes, that the doctor that I was seeing, even though my test came back under the marks, was like, no, she just looked at me based on looks. And I don't want to say that I've never been like a bone thin kind of person, if that makes sense. I was never necessarily completely overweight, but I think that when people see me, they don't think skinny, if you will. And so she was looking at me, and even though the numbers were saying something, she's looking at the way that I look. She's looking at the fact that my family has a history of diabetes and said, no, I don't care what the tests say. You have to follow this track. Go see a doctor, an endocrinologist for this, and it needs to be monitored. And you need to kind of take on this new protocol. And so I was going to the specialist, and even he was looking at me and going, well, your numbers aren't saying this. I don't know what your doctor is wanting from me.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep doing what you're doing. And I guess check your blood sugars. And that's all we can really do, is just make sure you've got it. And so at that point, again, hearing that and hearing this doctor tell me, well, this must be an issue. Again, going back to the fact that that protector in me is very, very strong from, like I said, from childhood, I was kind of immediately sent into just high anxiety and almost very rigid, because, okay, they're telling me that I could harm my baby. And so there was just tons of fear, tons of anxiety that was just laced in. It was overly kind of checking everything. And I can't eat that because they say that that's going to make it worse. And just the amount of fear that this doctor kind of instilled in me, it was really crippling. So much so that because of how stringent I had become out of this fear that, this doctor was trying to tell me I was going to hurt my baby, if you will, and hurt myself in that way, that after I had the baby, I had lost about 30 pounds from my starting weight before I got pregnant, because of how much I was just strapped in and just so fearful that I was going to do the wrong thing.
So when you had the glucose screen, the labs came back normal. And even with the normal labs, the doctor still sent you to endo for further follow-up. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Did you continue testing your sugars also throughout the pregnancy, and they were normal and everything was fine?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I kept, because again, I was trying to do the right thing. I kept food logs. I was testing my sugars. They were all coming back normal. I never once took any medications. The endocrinologist, he would just be like, okay, what are your numbers? He'd be like, it all looks good. I don't know what else to tell you, but because I don't know what this other doctor, your OB wants, just keep doing what you're doing, I guess. And that was it. Like I remember my endocrinologist appointments, they were so fast. I was in and out of there all the time because there was nothing to do. And so I was just like, well, okay, I guess I have to just keep doing this. And so I had to, they made me increase my OB appointments. I had to do the non-stress tests for like the last month or two. I can't remember. Sorry, it was like 11 years ago. I'm trying to remember now. But I had to do the non-stress test. I mean, the whole thing, and she kept, I remember her measuring my belly and the amount of times that she'd be like, oh my gosh, you're getting too big. You're getting too big. And just, it scared me as a first-time parent. This is my first child, and I was trying so hard to do it right, if you will.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, coming from the perspective of a labor and delivery nurse and being at bedside with my patients and hearing in your voice how this affected you, hearing it in your story. I want to say, I'm sorry that happened to you. I wish you had a relationship with a birth provider that was able to support you more in giving you the accurate information and the support that you needed. I'm curious, how much did he weigh when he was born?
He was, gosh, you're going to test me now. He was under 7 pounds.
Under 7 pounds. Okay. Yeah, that is difficult to hear.
I was just going to say he was small, so much so that the doctor, that same doctor was the one that delivered him. And she didn't audibly, he's a lot smaller than I thought he was going to be, as she delivered him, because of, again, in her mind, he was going to be huge based off of how I was measuring, based off of her preconceived kind of notions about me and the way that I looked that she did. I remember because he was tiny. The biggest thing on him was his head. He was a 99 percentile for his head circumference. So that was the biggest, and the rest of his body. I mean, even now, he's always been on the low end. Like, it's work to get him onto a growth chart. That's how small he is. And that's been his whole life.
We paused this episode for a quick message from our sponsor. At Maternal Wealth, we aim to ensure that you have access to the best and the most appropriate care. That's why we created a maternal healthcare provider database. Maternal health providers can easily create profiles to promote their services and business, helping to increase access for those seeking their care. This is a one-of-a-kind database that offers a new and exciting way for women to search for and find maternal health providers near them and tailored to their specific needs. Profiles feature badges that highlight various services such as TOLAC-friendly practices, all-female practices, LGBTQAI+ inclusivity, language options, access to vaginal breach services, and more. Additionally, be sure to check out our Not Your Average Birth course. In this course, I discuss the variations that exist in hospital practices based on policies, staffing, and budgets, all of which can directly affect your birth experience and outcome. Did they induce you or did you go into labor?
So I was scheduled to be induced that evening at 6 p.m. He arrived at 4 p.m. That same day. And so they had scheduled me because, again, they were saying, you're getting so huge. He has to come out. This is getting dangerous. And that's the evening before I was supposed to go in is when official labor started.
The practice that you were being seen prenatally, was it a private practice where there was just one OB, or was it a practice in which there were multiple OBs that you rotated through?
Multiple OBs that I rotated through.
And then when the day that you went into labor, it just happened to be the day that this particular doctor was on?
Yes. It was incredibly upsetting for me.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
How was the delivery in the pushing? Did you push for a while, or because of his size, he kind of just slid on out?
Yeah, it was really interesting how it happened. So I was actually having fairly strong contractions for about 2 weeks leading up to actual active labor. And I say that because since I was doing the non-stress test, there were multiple times where they saw them on while I was strapped up to the machine, and they're like, oh yeah, like that's a legit contraction. Like it's more than just like a Braxton Hicks. And I was having those for about 2 weeks leading up. So when things got moving, if you will, they moved fairly fast. I remember that one of my chronic illnesses does put a lot of stress on my body. And so my blood pressure was starting to go up once I was in the hospital. And that same doctor kept coming in and saying, well, I think that this is going to be dangerous for babies. So I think because at that point I had been doing it with no medications. And they said, I think that you need to get an epidural. I was at first, saying, I can do this. Like I'm capable. I can do this. And they were saying, no, your blood pressure is going too high. You need to do an epidural. And so again, they start throwing out, this could hurt baby. As I mentioned, very much protector. So I'm like, okay, well, if you're telling me that this is what I need to do for baby, then fine, let's do it. And so the person who was giving me my epidural stuck me about 5 times and couldn't get it. Finally said they got it, but it wasn't working. I could feel everything. It told them, like I could move. And they're like, oh, well, give it some time. Well, meanwhile, he's coming. And so I told the nurse that was with me, I said, I feel like I need to push. And so she was like, okay, well, let's see. And she's like, well, yeah, you're completely dilated, which she was a little bit surprised about because I had only been there, like I said, for a short amount of time. And they had just given me the epidural at this point, as far as it finally quote unquote was in. And she was like, okay, let's try it. And I was able to get a push that she said, that's exactly it. If you can do that, he'll be out, no problem. And I said, okay, well, since I know what it feels, I can still feel everything. Let me do that again. And so I did only maybe a couple more pushes. And she was like, okay, I need you to hold on. I need to go get the doctor. And I said, okay. And so then the doctor came in, and again, preconceived notions. She was like, no way is she ready. She just got in here. And so she goes to check and double check the nurse's work. Didn't believe the nurse. And then I pushed again, and she was like, whoa, hang on a second. And she was like, quit gown herself. And within just a couple more pushes, he was out. It wasn't until after he was out that the epidural kicked in.
Okay. So then after you were just epiduralized for your postpartum recovery.
Yes, yes. And unfortunately, not only did this provider, I have that experience with her kind of leading up to it, but the way that she stitched me up, I had significant scarring tissue that required, oh gosh, I can't remember, where they do the swabbing to kind of burn it off, if you will. I had to do that for the next year.
So how did you know that you had the scarring? What kind of symptoms were you having?
I had significant pain, even just with sitting down. Any tight pants, jeans, I was in tears. I could not. Having sex was just a nightmare. And my child also ended up having some health issues as far as he stopped eating at 3 months old. And I think, again, some of that was because doctors weren't listening to me to intervene sooner before we got to the place where he stopped eating. So at that point, the only way that I was able to get food into him is I had to do kind of what I now know is maybe kind of a very, very rough version of dream feed, which had me I had to rock him because he wouldn't take a bottle, he wouldn't take breast, he wouldn't take formula, nothing, just would not eat.
Okay.
And so I had to essentially get him to the point where he was about to fall asleep, where his automatic kind of functions would take over and he would latch, and then get him to fall asleep so that he wouldn't resist eating. And I would hand express milk into him while he slept. And so I generally did that in a rocking chair, trying to keep him asleep while I hand expressed milk into him. And so that was sitting. And so I would just be in excruciating pain from sitting and the scar tissue, pain because I don't have a baby that's participating in the eating. So I was doing all the work and trying to do it while he was sleeping. So the whole sleep when baby sleeps, I couldn't do that because I had to feed him while he slept. And so it was awful. And then I would go into the appointments to do the treatment, if you will. I mean, it was painful. And like I said, I had to do multiples of those to the point that they were saying, if it doesn't get any better, we might have to recut you and try to sew it back up. Part of the reason why that I know that it was more, in my opinion at least, that it was more on the provider side and less me is because with my second child. So with that sew up, if you will, at that point, my epidural had already kicked in. So I wasn't moving, there wasn't any of that versus my second child. So he was a surprise home birth. And then I got rushed to the hospital via ambulance. And so by the time I got to the doctor and I got sewn up with my second child, I didn't have, an epidural for sure. And all of the adrenaline from having a baby had worn off. So I could feel every, they tried to give me some numbing, but truth be told, it really didn't do much for me. And so I could feel every single stitch. And it was probably one of the hardest things, even harder than having the child by myself.
Yeah.
For my second kid was trying to sit still because I knew, and I was so fearful I was going to get scar tissue again, that I was trying to hold still while someone was sewing up my most delicate parts. And I had no scar tissue. I had the healing on that was just night and day. And so the fact that I was the same person and the circumstances, like I said, I could feel everything and I had to just grin and bear it, trying not to move, even though my whole body wanted to jump out and be like, stop doing this. the provider was still able to kind of do her thing with my second son. It was a completely different provider. And like I said, my recovery and the scarring, it wasn't there with my second one.
Do you remember if they gave you a grade for your tearings, like a first, second, or third degree tear or a fourth?
Honestly, I don't know that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm just curious. Regardless, your story, I'm imagining you in a rocking chair feeding your child who is resisting nutrition, right? It's an innate urge that we have to feed our child. So you're sitting there, you're having the pain in your vagina, you're trying to feed your child. You have the physical, the emotional, everything, the innate urge. It's a lot. So I feel for you, imagining you in those postpartum months. It's a lot.
Yeah. It was. It definitely took a toll. And like I said, I think part of the piece that made it more difficult is that I had a lot of those medical professionals who didn't seem to hear me and didn't seem to hear that there was something seriously going on here, and was writing it off on, again, I'm a first-time parent. I'm just acting dramatic, whatever, insert opinion about me here. And so I think that for me just intensified the loneliness of being in it and being so hard.
At what point did a provider listen to you and check down there and see that there was something clinically going on that needed treatment?
It took, I want to say, a few months into after postpartum, and it was one of the other rotating doctors that I had a good experience with, but I would only have her once every kind of blue moon, it felt like. And so it didn't take until she came in and I expressed the same thing that I had been expressing for those several months, that she was like, let's take a look. And so then after that, she was the one that was treating me and doing the treatments for the rest of the time. And so I didn't rotate anymore at that point for the, was it nitrate, silver nitrate, I want to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those treatments. And so, like I said, it took that first year before it was gone. And I was able to kind of move on without the pain.
Nine years later, I know you did okay with your second, but she's doing good now. You're in a much better place.
Both of my kids, yes. He's started eating at 18 months. So that was our life for the first 18 months of his life, my first 18 months of being a parent. But yes, thankfully, like I said, the only kind of residual is that he's just lower on the growth chart, but he eats on his own. He's a good eater considering his size. And so I'm very, very grateful and fortunate for that.
I want for you to share with our listeners your birth story for your second child. I know we chatted a little bit about your story when we met, but I think it's an interesting one because I talk about the variances of how hospitals can vary in when they let patients come in. And some hospitals will have policies where patients can come in the moment they feel like a Braxton Hicks, and then some hospitals want patients to really be in labor. If you will, just share with us a little bit about how you went into labor and how that ended up playing out for you.
Yes. So my doctor had told me it needed to be kind of 5 minutes for an hour as far as the contractions.
I just want to ask real quickly before, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is it the same doctor as your first, or did you have a new doctor?
I had a new doctor.
Okay, perfect.
New doctor. And same thing happened with the gestational diabetes. It came back normal. So I didn't have to do anything for that second child as far as going to the endocrinologist. Yes, I had a new doctor. In fact, I found after all of the headache with my first child and even getting doctors to listen to what was going on with him, I had finally found a doctor that I loved and was listening to us. And so when I found out that I was pregnant with my second child, I went to her and I said, do you have another OB? Because I don't want to go back to the original one. And so this was the doctor that she said, if I were pregnant right now and I needed somebody, this is who I would go to. I said, okay, great. That's who I'm going to go to. The difficulty though with that is that doctor, their hospital was about 40 minutes away from where I live, which for doctor's appointments, I was fine. I'll go commute that way. It was a much better experience. I'll do it. But it also meant that when came time for labor, and I didn't want to go drive that 40 minutes just to get turned away and told I couldn't be admitted and have to drive all the way back and kind of do that hustle and bustle. And so the doctor did say that, 5 minutes for an hour, then yes, come in. And so because of that, I was really watching at that point, I had a contraction app. It's less fancy than the ones they have today, after 9 years, 10 years, they've come a long way as far as some of the apps that they have and that I've seen other folks use. But back then it was just like a timer pretty much that kept a log. And so I would hit a button when my contraction would start and I'd turn it off when I was done. It would tell me kind of and keep track of me in that way. And so similarly to my first child, I was having those really intense Braxton Hicks or contractions, whatever you want to call them, kind of the 2 weeks leading up to it. And so when I was having them, I thought, okay, this is just it again. This is par for the course. I remember this. And so I kept working. And I remember the day that I actually ended up having my second child. I had gone to work. It was my last day at work. And at this point, I was a therapist in a school. And I was sitting there through sessions. I was conducting therapy sessions, having contractions. So I would just sit with my phone. I would tell them, hey, I'm just going to keep track of something over here. No big deal. Keep talking. And so I would hit the contraction button. Okay, contraction's over. I would turn it off, keep doing my session. In fact, at that point, I had one of my kids that I was working with who had a lot of anxiety, a lot of kind of ADHD stuff. And so for him, it was really helpful if we walked and talked during our session. So we would walk, the school that I was at was next to the beach. And so we would walk all the way down to the beach while we were doing our session and then walk all the way back. And so I was doing all of this and, I had my phone with me and I just kept timing myself and doing my sessions. And at this point, they weren't consistent. They were kind of all over the place as far as timing, at least according to my tracker. So I said, okay, I still have some time. I'm all good. And so I just kept doing, I worked my entire full day. And I remember because I even had a meeting afterwards. And so I, it was around a bunch of adults and other women who had children. And they saw me kind of keeping time and they were like, do we need to take you to the hospital? And I looked at my timing and I said, no, I'm still good. Let's keep going. And so I did. And then I drove myself home. In fact, actually, I even drove myself to daycare because my son was at daycare at this point.
Oh my goodness.
And so I drove myself to his daycare to pick him up. And all the meanwhile, I had my phone right next to me and I would just reach over, hit the timer as I'm driving and turn it off when the contraction was done. And I called my husband and I said, hey, the contractions, they're not stopping. So I think that this is a good time for you to come home. He said, okay. So he got in the car. He was like, do we need to just meet you at the hospital? I said, no, they're not consistent yet. Let's just meet at home. Mm-hmm. And so I picked up my son from daycare. I drove me and my son back home. And so then I went, after my husband got home, I left my son with my husband and I went into the bedroom to kind of keep going because I said, I don't want to go down there and get turned away. It's such a long drive and I didn't want to inconvenience anyone. And at this point, we were 2 weeks before my quote unquote due date. We don't have family in the area. And so we didn't have anybody to watch my son because people weren't planning on coming in until 2 weeks from now. So I was like, I really don't want to have to, lug all three of us down there just to get turned away. So I said, I'll be in the bedroom and I'll just keep doing my thing. And they finally got to that 5 minutes for an hour. And the minute that they did, I told my husband, I said, hey, it's time for us to go. He said, okay. And so we were packing up. And with the very next contraction, I said, stop, I need to push. We're not going to the hospital. And he said, what are you talking about? He thought I was joking. And I said, no, I need you to call 911. And at this point, my husband he went into fight or flight mode kind of deal, I say, and he's freaking out. And so he's like, what? I need to call. Okay, let me get my phone. And he's just like running around the house trying to find his phone. And meanwhile, my water breaks and I go into problem solving mode. My husband's freaking out. So I'm just like, this is going to happen. I need to figure it out. And the first thing I thought was, okay, in the movies, they're in like a tub of water. So let me get to my bathtub, because that's all like I could think of in that moment. So I start waddling my way to the bathtub, and my husband, meanwhile, he gets his phone, and because he's so frantic, instead of calling 911, he dialed 991. And so it gives him that, like, this is not a working number, right? And so then my husband freaks out. He goes, 911 isn't working. And I'm just trying to like get myself to a bathtub at this point. And I was like, I need you to figure it out right now. I just need to get to the bathtub. And so, like I said, on my walk, my water breaks. And so I'm like, okay, this is legit happening here. And I turn on the faucet to the bathtub, and the bathtub had maybe half an inch to an inch of water. And when I sat down to try to sit into the bathtub, he just flew right out. And I remember him kind of skidding across the bathtub in the water, like kind of one of those luges. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I like scooped him up, and I was like, I'm so sorry. Put him on my chest, because I was like, I don't know what to do. And so at this point, my husband finally got an operator, a 911 operator. And because it happened so fast, he had literally just gotten on and said, my baby's having a baby. Nope, my wife just had a baby. And so they're like, okay, like, but we need to get something to tie off the umbilical cord. And he was like, I don't have anything. And they were like, do you have a shoelace? He was like, yes, I can do that. Well, out of all of the shoes that he chose a hiking boot that had those like really intricate laces. And so he's trying to like unlace this hiking boot, and it's taking a really long time. And so meanwhile, while that happened, the fire department got there. And so he didn't even get the shoelace unstrung, and the fire department showed up. At this point in my life, I felt like I was a fairly conservative person as far as dress wise. At this point, I'm completely naked in my bathtub, and 5 male firefighters jammed into my bathroom in all my full glory. And I was just sitting there, and I was like, hey guys, thanks for coming. Here's my baby. And they were all just very frazzled.
Yeah.
And kept saying, oh, we need so-and-so. And it was a name. And I was like, who's this person? Who's this magical person that they're waiting for? And so they're trying to like, they cut the umbilical cord, and they're just saying, we need so-and-so, we need so-and-so. And finally, this person emerged. It was the only female firefighter they had on staff. And the minute she showed up, they shoved the baby in her direction, was like, here you go. And then they came and they took care of me. And I was like, okay, so you guys are still very like, we need a woman to come take care of this baby. And so then they surrounded me. They got me in a gurney and took me. But because at this point I'd been only doing it by myself, I had not delivered the placenta yet. And so they were concerned with the blood loss there. And so it was in the ambulance that we need to get this out of you because you're continuing to bleed at this point. And so the only female firefighter helped me deliver the placenta. I held baby while she helped me get that out, and I was able to get it out. I was, again, very, very fortunate. Probably the best case scenario for my baby, that I didn't lose enough blood that I needed a transfusion, so that we were able to kind of get things under control. Like I said, the only kind of difference was getting me sewn up once I did get to the hospital. But he had come so fast. It was so funny. I had nurses coming to visit us because they had heard about the bathtub baby. That's what they were calling him. And the remark that I kept getting is they had never seen a head so round. So when the nurses were coming in, they were like, oh my gosh, his head is so round. And I just kept hearing that. And it stuck out because it's the strangest thing to hear people say about how round his head was. But they were telling me that it must have been because he wasn't in the canal for a very long time, that his head was very round. And so I became this attraction, my baby's head, and we became this, like, everybody came to visit us that was working the floor that night and even to the next day.
As a labor and delivery nurse, like, we love when women come in home births. It's just like, it's so infrequent that we get to see it. So we're all just like, let's go check this out.
Okay, well, that makes a little bit more sense now.
That's awesome, though. So I'm curious for your immediate postpartum recovery. How was it different at all with your first and your second, since you had two, like, very different experiences?
I think it was a little bit more straightforward, and it also felt easier because, again, I wasn't having all those complications. So the fact that I wasn't having the significant amount of pain, because I didn't have family there to watch my son, I begged to get out of the hospital as soon as I can. I was healing up pretty fast, so they did let me go. I spent one overnight with them, and I apologize too, the night, because I came in the evening. So technically there was that one overnight, and then I had one more. And so they let me go the next day, which was a lot shorter than my first time. And then when I got home, like I said, and again, how much of it is skewed by the fact that I had a toddler I had to take care of at the same time. So I don't necessarily remember sitting in it in that way. That very well could be at play. Also, as I mentioned, I didn't have quite the pain that I had. I had pain, of course, because I was a whole lot that, my body went to war and back.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it wasn't quite as drawn out, I think, as my first. And then with feeding my son, he didn't quite have the same issues that my first son had. He did need to move over to a completely broken down amino acid formula, though, because he had some tummy issues with the breast milk and any other kind of formulas that weren't as broken down. But because, again, I had at this point had already found and gone through the headache of finding a good doctor for my first son, that this doctor was already very, very familiar. And so the minute that there was any kind of tummy troubles, we were like, okay, let's go into problem solving mode. We were able to kind of find him a formula fairly quickly. And then once we found that, he ate no problem. So things moved a little bit faster as far as when there were any issues. We were able to get a little bit more movement. I remember going to my first appointment because I wasn't there for my actual doctor with my second son to deliver. And he even came in. I remember the doctor came in to round on me after that next morning. And he said, why didn't you come in sooner so you could have the baby here? And I said, I was trying to follow what you said. And I pulled out my app and I showed him the inconsistencies between my contractions. I said, it didn't get consistent. And I can't, I wanted to come the minute that they did. See, look at my app. And he was like, oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. I see that. And so the first time I came back, though, to see him, he did check out my stitches. And he even remarked, he was like, she stitched you up really nicely. Great job. And he made that comment. And so again, for me, that was another sign that this was very different, that even the doctor kind of made an audible like, oh, yeah, she did good.
Want to turn the conversation over to your company. I'm looking at your website, and there are a lot of different things that you offer. When I first went here, I was assuming, okay, general couples counseling, therapy, but you have a lot going on. You have couples counseling, you have couples intensive, which I think is very interesting. I'd like for you to share with us a little bit about. And then also bringing baby home workshop, parenting workshop. I like how it's not just one thing, that you really bring all the things together that can affect couples in parenthood that we don't really anticipate when we're pregnant and before we become parents. I'm curious, when you started Embrace Renewal Therapy and Wellness Collective, did you have all these ideas in mind, or was it kind of like an organic process that these different workshops came together?
So a little bit of yes, a little bit of no.
Okay.
And I say that because, as I mentioned, the first half of my therapy career, I was working a lot with the children and their families. And for me, some of the difficulty is that it felt more reactive treatment. Like once there was kind of a problem, and sometimes by the time they came to see me, we're talking higher level of acuity. At that point, usually the parents were at their wits' end and they would just kind of drop off their kid and say, hey, fix my kid. Please make it better. And then they would kind of leave because they're overwhelmed. They've got a ton on their plate. And the difficulty is I could do some really great work with the kids, but if I'm sending them right back home to the same kind of stressed out environment or what have you, it felt very fruitless. And I didn't love the feeling. I didn't feel like I was being helpful. And I want to be helpful. And so I really had to take a step back and figure out, okay, how can I be more preventative in my care? And so what I found is actually there's a lot less support for parents than there ought to be, considering how hard this is and the fact that these parents are holding the future of our generation in their hands. There needs to be 10 times more the amount of resources and support that's out there, in my personal opinion. And so there's not, we focus a lot, a lot of times the couples therapy, they're already, again, their higher level of acuity, it takes a breakdown for them to finally come into the room. Because again, I think a lot of the parents that I end up seeing, there's this mentality of my kids need to come first. And so even if that means, sacrificing my own wellness, my own relationship wellness, well, that's what I need to do in order to make sure that this kid is thriving and doing good. And so my hope in the design when I ended up kind of opening up this practice was how can I actually support more the parent side of things and the parents, their own wellness, their relationship wellness, so that they have permission that it's okay and in fact very necessary for them to take some time for themselves and make sure that they're good. And once they do that, it actually allows them more capacity to show up for their kids in the way that they really want to and they really desire and dream of. So I went and I got additional certifications. I'm trained in Gottman couples therapy as well as emotionally focused couples therapy. Again, all with the design to be able to work with the couples and work with the parents. I got my additional credentials to be able to hold those workshops, again, with the idea that I want to be as helpful and preventative as possible. And so from that kind of came, like I said, the additional workshop certifications that I took. Bringing Baby Home is one that's specifically designed for folks that are either planning on having children, expecting a child, or have them between 0 and 3. And it can be for your first kid, it can be for your 5th kid, because anytime we're bringing in a new child to the mix, it's a new dynamic and it's a new transition. And so really, how can I empower couples to have the resources, to have the tools to really support their thriving and then ultimately their families thriving as well?
Talk to us a little bit about the difference between couples counseling and then couples intensives.
Yeah, so couples counseling that I offer, I am, as you mentioned, licensed in California. So that's going to be for anybody who is physically in the state of California, that I offer kind of your traditional one-on-one therapy that's weekly or biweekly based off of needs. And so that's kind of what you would think of when you think of traditional therapy. The couples intensives that I offer is usually over one weekend. And so I have folks that will come in. I'm in Southern California wine country. So we have lots of wineries around us. And so they'll come kind of for like their own little retreat, if you will. They'll do an intensive weekend with me. And that's really ideal for folks that for us to really do some really nice, deep, focused work on 1 to 2 areas that they're feeling some pain points. So, for example, I've got some couples who maybe there's just one particular topic, maybe it's extended family, right? The in-laws, that just every time that topic comes up, they just hit a wall and they get really stuck in it. And so that's a great one that we go in and we figure out what's tripping them up, what's that pattern that they kind of fall into, and let's do some really great deep work in getting you unstuck from that all within a weekend. And so they can do some of that sessions with me during the day. And then in the evening, like I said, they can go to the wineries, they can just have a little kind of weekend retreat. And so that's what folks will come in and do the intensives for. And so if they need, periodic tune-ups, they have that ability. But really the idea is that it's kind of a one in, do some deep work to really kind of hit a big pain point for them.
Do you find that couples come for the couples intensive? Are they coming from mostly close by, or do you get couples from maybe the East Coast?
Yeah, it's open to anybody. And folks will, like I said, they'll kind of make a little retreat weekend out of it for themselves, like a marriage retreat, and be able to work here. You just have to physically be here when I see you. And that's it. So that's kind of the pros and cons. Like I said, you would just have to physically be here for either the counseling or the intensives. The workshops I do offer virtually. And so that's open to anybody worldwide. If you have access to internet, you can sign up for any of those workshops that I offer.
I read on your site, you wrote, "Don't let my skincare routine fool you. I'm a mom of 2 and with my partner for 16 years. I know firsthand how hard this shit is." I love that you put that out there. I feel like it's so personable. We, as parents, we go through the postpartum period and it's hard. This is so real and it's so raw. Whoever needs to find services, find help, find therapy so they can find that relationship, they can find themselves again, feel comfortable coming to you, because we're all human. We're all just like each other and we're all going through it, right? And we all just need somebody to help us get through those difficult postpartum period.
You're so right. It is hard. And I think that that's one of the reasons, again, with my own journey, that it was so important to me to also go into this and be that support that I wish I had when I was going through my own hard, because it was really lonely and it can feel really isolating. And that's probably the number one thing I hear from so many parents over and over, is that, especially with our social media and the movies, there's a very big discrepancy in what's actually happens as a parent and what you're experiencing versus what gets depicted or what gets talked about, frankly.
One last question for anyone who's listening and they might be going through something similar in which something clinically is happening to them or their child, and they don't believe that the providers in their care are listening to them. What advice would you give to help them be seen, be heard, and to get the help that they need?
I think that the biggest one that I have found for myself on a personal side and professionally is really kind of honoring your own gut and what's happening. So if something is wrong, if your gut is trying to send you a message, that usually that's coming from a real place, in the sense that your body's trying to send you signals that we're feeling like this needs to at least be seen and heard. Maybe it is just, us taking extra precautions, and that's okay too. And so if you have a provider that isn't listening to you, and you have the ability to find a different provider, 100% that's okay, to kind of find someone who will listen to you and who does get it. Like I said, I had to find a couple different pediatricians. It took a completely new OB to finally find people that were listening to me. And it was a much different experience with my second child. And so it's okay to kind of go find those people if you have the ability. And if you don't, again, continuing to just get big, let them know, really using as clear kind of emotion words like, hey, this is, even if you don't agree with me, can you at least humor me right now? And let's just pretend that maybe something is, could we do a little extra test or just spend a little extra time listening to me? And really knowing that it's absolutely okay for you to advocate for yourself. If you are speaking in a respectful way and respecting yourself, respecting the provider, that it's okay to express your complaints. And in fact, it's very, very much appropriate for you to express a complaint. And have those people hear you. No matter what provider it is, you still deserve to be treated with respect and kindness and with care.
Reesa, if our listeners want to learn more about you and find your practice, how can they find you?
Best way to find me is through my website. It's called embracerenewaltherapy.com. And you'll find everything. You'll find links to the workshops, the workshop dates. If you would like to come see me for a retreat weekend, all of that is on there. You'll also find access to my own podcast called The Real Family Eats, where all we do is we talk about the real stuff that actually happens with parenting and how hard it is. At the same time, every guest that comes on shares a recipe. So you'll get to hear a story that is probably very relatable, something that you've experienced or you know someone who has, and you get a recipe out of it too. And so all of that is on my website.
We will attach all links to your social media and to your website. Thank you so much for coming on and being open and vulnerable and sharing your story. The reason why I'm doing this podcast is so we can teach, learn, heal, and grow together. So I really appreciate you taking time at a busy schedule to meet with me and share your story on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey there, amazing listeners. If you love what we do and want to see our podcast grow, we need your help. By making a donation, you'll be supporting us and bringing you even more great content. I truly believe creating this space for women all across the globe to share their story will allow us to collectively heal, grow, and become more empowered in the space that we deserve to be. Motherhood, womanhood, and however that looks and feels for each and every one of us. Every contribution, big or small, will make a huge difference. If you can, head over to support us today. There's a link in the bio to support the podcast. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being a part of this journey. Thank you for listening. Be sure to check out our social media. All links are provided in the episode description. We're excited to have you here. Please give us a follow. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, reach out to us via email at info@maternalwealth.com. And remember, stay healthy, embrace your power, and you got this.